Welcome, Gunrunner.
Hello everybody, Kieran aka The Laird here, and I've got a new hardware review for you today, and it's something very nice and something completely new for the channel, because I haven't actually ever reviewed any Acorn computers on here before, so I'm very pleased to finally correct that. I've done videos related to the BBC and Electron etc. in the past, but never any hardware. So yeah, we finally correct that with a look at the Acorn Electron. I'd been after one of these absolutely ages, and the reason for that is literally just because I love how it looks. I just think it's such a beautiful looking computer. I think it's got a really cool design. It's easily, for me, one of the best looking 8-bit home micros. Really is great looking thing. And I've never actually played on one at all as a kid. I didn't know anyone who had one. Certainly, I only played on them in more recent years, like retro events and stuff. My own experience is all with the BBC Micro. I've got a really soft spot for the BBC Micro, because I used one at junior school, I used one at senior school. It got me an A in computer studies at GCSE. And my next door neighbour, Martin, when I had a Spectrum, he had a BBC Micro, a really good BBC Micro setup as well. He had the master, he had the disk drive, he had everything for it, a printer, he had the whole lot because his parents bought it for him because they thought it'd be good for school. But of course, all he did was mainly play games on it. But we'll go into the BBC and its connection more in a little while. But yeah, I mean, and the funny thing was that I'd agreed to. There was a guy selling one on Facebook Marketplace that I kind of agreed to buy, and then he messed me around, and basically he said it was 25 quid unworking, and he had it as local pickup, and then he said, "Oh no, I'm only willing to post it. You can't pick it up," even though he was really local to me. So he wanted an extra £15 to post it, which I thought was ridiculous. And then when I actually said to me, "Oh, actually no, the price is 35, not 25," that was a mistake in the listings. He then tried it on with me to put the price up. Then he wanted 50 quid, including post and packing. I just thought, no, I'm not going to do it. I bet I can get one cheaper on eBay, because they don't go for huge amounts. I already knew that from when I'd done some research into them before. I've been on a couple in the past, actually, not won them, so it wasn't my first time I tried to grab an Electron. But yeah, so I gave up on that. I went on eBay immediately just to see what was on there, and there was this one with a 99p start, and ended up winning it for, I think it was £28 I won it for. So cannot grumble at that at all. Very good indeed. So yes, the Acorn Electron. So I kind of already mentioned the BBC, and I'm sure most people know its connection to the BBC Micro. So the Acorn Electron is, to all intents and purposes, a cut down budget version of the BBC Micro. One of the chief criticisms of the BBC Micro when it came out, as good as it was how much it cost. And once the Spectrum launched, where you could get a Spectrum for as little as $129.99 for the 16K model, and a BBC, which was, I think, I'm trying to remember how much a BBC was, but I think it was about 400, something like that. Even for their, they had a 16K model and a 32K model, so it was over. I think it was over twice the price of the Spectrum just for the 16K model of the BBC. So yeah, there was a big price difference, and obviously there was other computers on the horizon, stuff like the Commodore 64, Dragon 32 coming out, and Acorn started to panic, and they knew straight away that they needed something that was going to appeal to more budget conscious people, who would otherwise go out and buy Spectrum. But they also wanted to not kind of cheapen themselves by producing something like the Spectrum with its rubber keys and very basic design. So they announced that they were going to basically make a budget version of the BBC to be released in mid 1983, and they even almost straight away said it was called the Electron, which is unusual because obviously usually they sort of announce they're working on something, the name comes much later, but they obviously had that name in mind. So yeah, that's how it came about. But they obviously said it would still have a proper keyboard, and it would be semi-compatible with the BBC and stuff like that. So there was very high hopes for it, obviously based on that, because the BBC Micro was an incredibly powerful machine for the time. I think when it came out in '81, really the only computer out there that was more powerful than the BBC Micro was the Atari 800. So yeah, it was a great machine, no doubt. So it was it was due for release in mid '83. That got delayed, and the reason it got delayed was because they had to basically create custom chips for the Electron, because apparently the BBC Micro had over 100 different chips inside it, and they wanted to cut that down in the Electron to about 14 or 15, I believe, was their quote that they wanted to do. I'm not sure how many are actually in the final model, and that involved creating custom chips that would combine a lot of the functions, and one of those for this was a ULA, and the ULA would do lots and lots of the functions in one, and that was an incredibly advanced chip. And obviously Acorn, we all know, are the kind of originators of creating these custom chips. Obviously still exists in a way now as ARM, and you'll have an ARM chip in every single mobile device out there pretty much. So that's their origins, and that was apparently very difficult to manufacture. And the manufacturer they contracted in Malaysia were having trouble reproducing it, so they ran into all sorts of issues with building the machines, and that meant they delayed it a bit, and it was meant to come at just before Christmas '83. They couldn't get it out for Christmas '83 either properly, not in significant numbers. They had a small amount apparently made it out the door. Not very many though. They also got some review computers out to the press and stuff, and the media in general were very impressed with the Acorn Electron. They gave it pretty rave reviews in most areas. There were a few criticisms, which I'll go into in a little while, but generally they thought it was a great computer for the price, which was $199.99. So it was a little bit more expensive than the Spectrum, but you've got a proper keyboard. You've got 32K of memory, so they were kind of halfway house in between the Spectrum, which either had 16K or 48K. But with this, you've got 32K of memory, the same as the BBC B, and you've got a proper keyboard. And that was actually one of the things that people praised most in the reviews, was the fact it had an excellent keyboard, just as good as the one on the BBC Micro. They said it was the best keyboard for a computer in its price range, which I don't think there's much doubt about that. I mean, these keys are excellent. Nice, really nice feel to them. So then the problem came that they had massive orders for the Acorn Electron for that Christmas of '83. W.H. Smith in particular had ordered massive amounts because they were really backing this computer. They thought it was going to sell really well. And Acorn couldn't deliver, but going into '84, they produced absolutely tons of them. Got the 3 different factories producing them, including the famous Wong factory, which produced computers for loads of different people, like Atari and IBM as well. So they had lots of different companies producing them. There's even a factory in Wales, I believe, that were producing them as well. But by the time they had all this inventory ready, no one was interested anymore, because there was none available when people wanted them at Christmas. And so they went and bought something else instead. Probably a Spectrum. Was was the, where most people probably ended up, to be honest. Possibly a Commodore 64, but the Spectrum was in the same kind of price range. Maybe the Dragon 32, because that sold very well for a while around that point. The Dragon was actually the second best-selling computer in the UK for a while. Supposedly, the Acorn Electron at one point was the best-selling computer in the UK for a very brief period. Apparently, it outsold the Spectrum. I've not seen any evidence of that, so citation needed. But that was something I was reading online. There was people saying that. It seems unlikely given the circumstances with its delayed releases and stuff like that, but you never know. So as they struggled to sell it through 84, because the bottom had dropped out of the computer market. People talk about the American crash, console crash, or the Atari crash, as some people unfairly call it. And the North American video game crash kind of killed that computer industry console industry, while computer industry kind of grew in the background and kind of took over for a little while. But in the UK, we never really had a console industry. Aside from the 2600, really was the only console that sold in any numbers, or VCS as it was back then. But we had a booming computer industry, and that's what happened here, kind of thing. There was too many computers on the market. We had the Spectrum, Dragon, Auric, Commodore 64, and the VIC-20. We had the Acorn Electron, the BBC. There was MSXs. God, there were so many. There was the Tatting Einstein. There was the Enterprise. The Amstrad CPC arrived. All these computers vying for space. There was probably about 50, different computers at one point sort of on the market. It was absolutely nuts. And, you can't sustain that kind of business, with so many people, trying to undercut each other. So then they weren't making a profit. It was crazy. So we basically had a home computer crash in the UK. And loads of companies went to the wall. People like Auric disappeared and Dragon disappeared. Loads of these companies did. But Acorn tried to push on regardless. Ended up having to sell a huge chunk of the company to Olivetti. They took a controlling stake in the company in the end. Before Acorn obviously disappeared completely in the end, because Olivetti took total control over them later on in the Archimedes years. But they put some heavy discounting into effect on the Electron. They reduced the price to $129.99, and that saw sales really pick up. I mean, that was a great price for a computer like this. But when it really got good was for the Electron, was later on that year. Well, actually in 85, I think it was, going into 85, Olivetti were keen to just dump all the stock of the Electron, basically. They weren't interested in supporting it anymore. And they'd actually lined up a replacement for the Electron by producing a BBC Master Compact, which was a similar kind of size computer, actually quite similar in many ways. I'll put a picture of that up in the corner so you can see it. We actually had a couple of Master Compacts at my school, and they were cool looking computers. And that was kind of there to replace the Electron. So they basically sold all their inventory to Dixon's. At that time were the biggest electronics retailer in the UK. Kind of got amalgamated into Currys, so they don't really exist anymore. They bought all of Acorn's stock. They were selling them at $99.99, so under £100 with software, which is a fantastic deal. So that's possibly actually, when people say that the Electron was the best-selling computer in the UK at one point, that might have been then actually, because $99.99 for Electrons was absolutely magnificent. They did something similar actually with the Atari 8-bit around that same time, because they bought all the stock of 800 XL computers from Atari, because Atari were then introducing the XE computers, and they did the same thing, bought all the stock and was selling them at the same price. I think it was $99.99. So it sold really, really well. Dixon's were really happy because they made lots of money on that. And that actually encouraged lots of companies to make new software for the Electron, and kept it going right up until really the early 90s. There was still the odd bit of software coming out. So it ended up having a pretty good and strong life. I believe about 250,000 Electrons were sold in total, which isn't too bad. I mean, if you want to compare it to the Spectrum, the Spectrum sold 5 million across Europe, whereas the Electron only really sold in the UK. What else? The BBC Micro, I think, sold about 1.5 million. So, but a lot of them would have gone to schools. So yeah, it did comparatively well in the UK. So now we've got that history out of the way. I thought that was important to give a good bit of this video to the history, because I think it's fascinating and very interesting and tells you a lot about the machine itself. I think it's got probably one of the more interesting histories of any 8-bit micro, especially in terms of what could have been. You have to wonder if had they got the Electron out in time, if it would have been a dominant platform in the UK because of the good value for money that it offered. So we'll have a look around the machine itself, and then we'll talk some more about the hardware. So we've talked about this fantastic full keyboard that you've got on the front. Certainly a lot better than the rubber key Spectrum. Really good keyboard with this lovely design. And there's a power light just there as well on the front. So on this side we have our TV video ports, so for monitors as well, and then the N1 RGB. Sorry, you won't be able to see this really. RGB, UHF TV video, RGB, and cassette. So that's the cassette connect. You could get a special lead that plugged in that DIN socket, and you could connect any regular tape deck to play games. That was the primary software source for the Electron, was games on tape, which we'll look at in a little while. We'll see some of those in the background. So yes, it was tape driven mostly. There was other things like discs and stuff came later, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So on the back there we have our expansion bus, which was unbelievable to see that it still had the plastic cover on it. I couldn't believe that when I got this. It shows how little it was probably used. And the sticker there is still on it as well, which is unusual to find, and still in almost perfect condition. That was one thing I was really pleased about. I paid so little for this, and it's in such fantastic condition. And there's a little bit about the computer there. This is a Malaysian model. It actually says 82 on it, but it's a Malaysian model. It probably wasn't produced in 82, but yeah. And then on the other side, I should mention that is nothing except the power socket. So it's quite simplified. The BBC had loads of different ports that you could connect stuff up to, and this just has those basic sockets. You will notice there is no joystick ports, so you were using keys to play games, but we'll talk about that in a moment, because there was a number of expansions that came out for this a bit later on. They weren't initially there at launch. I don't have any of these, so I'll show them up in the corner like I usually do. But first, actually, I want to mention is that this is all I got, was the computer itself. I didn't get tape recorder, I didn't get leads. There was a specific Electron branded tape recorder as well that you could buy. I think there was 2 different ones that Acorn produced, but I believe you can use regular ones as well. But I didn't get any of that, didn't get any of the cables, didn't get a power supply, so all I got was a computer, so I don't actually know if it works. I'd imagine it probably does, because it's in such good condition that it probably does work, and I will buy all the bits and pieces needed to get it working, I think, because I like it so much. But yes, going back to that for a moment. The first add-on they made was called the +1, which I'm showing there, and that plugged obviously into the back and stuck out, made the computer look larger at the back. That featured 2 cartridge ports, ROM cartridge ports, joystick ports, and other connection ports for things like printers. So very useful add-on. I would like to try and get one of those. They aren't. I think they're too hard to find. I think they're quite a bit more expensive to buy probably than the computer itself cost me. But they are out there, so I will try to hunt one of those down. So we'd like to get one of those, especially for ROM cartridges, which I love, and the fact you can then plug in joysticks, which is very, very useful indeed. So there is one of those. There was supposed to be a +2 expansion. That never came out. That would have provided EcoNet to link machines together like the BBC had. But as I say, that never arrived on the market. And there's a +3, which adds a 3.5-inch disk drive, which goes along the back, and then on the side of it is the disk drive. I'll show that again in the top right hand corner. So very, very useful if you didn't want to use tapes and you wanted to use discs instead. So you could have all these different options. And there was loads of third-party, obviously, expansion modules of different kinds to connect up to the Acorn Electron as well. And the internal hardware, as I mentioned, you had several of the different graphics modes that the BBC had. So obviously you had a high-resolution monochrome 80-column display for word processing, which was really good because not many budget computers had that. The Spectrum didn't and the Dragon didn't. So the fact the Acorn Electron had a kind of a high-resolution 80-column mode was a big thing. But they removed the teletext mode from the BBC, which a lot of people found really, really strange and thought that was a really bad move. That was one of the things that people did actually criticise on the Electron, was the fact they'd removed that teletext mode, because the teletext mode was often used on the BBC because it was very low memory usage. It didn't take up hardly any memory. So that would have been good for a computer like the Electron with a fairly small amount of RAM to have had something that didn't use a lot of memory. So yeah, it could display up to 16 colours like the BBC in a resolution of 160 x 256, pretty similar to like what the Spectrum was offering. And obviously it went down into different modes up to that high resolution monochrome mode. So it had plenty of colour, so very attractive graphics for a budget computer. Certainly a lot better than some other budget computers, like say the Mattel Aquarius was another one that kind of appeared as a budget alternative to the Spectrum and disappeared quite quickly. But another weak point of the Electron, which again was one thing that actually people did criticise in the reviews, was that it only had single channel sound, because they took out the sound chip, the 3-channel sound chip from the BBC, and just put a sound generator into one of the chips. So it only had very, very basic 1-channel sound, which was quite disappointing for a lot of people. But yeah, other than that, there was obviously, because of it sharing some of the graphics modes with the BBC and it being very similar on a hardware level, lots of the games that came out, there was lots of games where it was Electron and BBC on the same tape. So basically the software could detect which machine it was being played on. But there was also lots of specific Acorn Electron software, like you could see in the background. So we'll take a look at that next. So yeah, as you can see, I picked up these separately. I had a quick look to see if anyone was selling any games. I did get, actually I should mention, I only got the computer on its own. I did it. The guy actually last minute bunged in a load of tapes, which we'll take a look at in a moment. I just want to mention the stuff in the background though, because these were a big bundle I picked up. I only paid £17, so I was quite pleased to get all these lovely boxed Acorn Electron games for £17. A similar sized box to an Atari 2600 game, a little bit bigger I think, but particularly a favourite of mine there, Snapper, which I played to death on my next door neighbour's BBC Micro, and we had it on the BBC Micros at school as well, naughtily hidden as something else. That's what we used to do, get games and then rename the files. So the computer studies teacher wouldn't notice that we were putting games on our drives. So we go, obviously this is a rip-off of Pac-Man. It was originally called Pac-Man and Atari sued them, so they had to change all the graphics and the name and everything. So these are gatefold boxes though, which is quite cool, as you can see. Oops, and I dropped it on the floor. It's open like that with the instructions on the back of the card and the tape there in its case. I mean, these are in great condition, as you can see. Absolutely brilliant. So we've got some business software there. Got a desk diary. For those who want that, looks like that box has collapsed a little bit. We've got an adventure game there, Sphinx Adventure. There we go. Pretty cool. Tells you other software that's available on the back. Another kind of arcadey game there, so Boxer, platform game. Quite cool. And Starship Command here, which is particularly interesting because it uses the high resolution mode, as you can see. So it has high resolution graphics. It uses that 2-color monochrome mode, which not many games did, really, because obviously they wanted them to look more attractive, so they tried to use colours where possible. But actually, another thing I should mention is, I didn't mention when I was talking about the hardware of the Electron, and I meant to mention it, and I don't know why I didn't, was with regards to games and stuff being particularly important, was because of the reduced chipset in the Electron, it was about half as slow as the BBC, which meant that a lot of games would obviously play much slower and more sluggish on the Electron than they would on the BBC. And actually, when a lot of companies who made Electron-specific versions of games, what they would actually do sometimes is make cutbacks from the BBC versions to the Electron versions. So, for example, if you play Frack, which is a classic game for the BBC, and then you play the Electron version has no colour. And what you'll often find is, as well, there's a lot of Electron games that only play in half screen size. They'll only use the bottom half, usually the bottom half of the screen, and that was because of this speed issue. And a lot of that was because all these chips sharing a bus basically and competing against each other to access the memory, which the BBC didn't have those memory contention issues which the Electron had. So that did cost it a little bit, especially with games software. The actual ROM cartridge add-on that went in the back of it, because when you obviously with the ROM cartridge you are replacing the ROM in the computer, so it took out the BASIC and everything that was in here. It uses a version of BBC Basic, so very, very good BASIC. I should also mention that as well. Very good BASIC that actually lets you type freely like the BBC Basic does, but also had keyword shortcuts like the Spectrum had, so it's the best of both worlds. So really, really good BASIC on this. But the ROM cartridges would replace the BASIC operating system, so it had access to the full 32K. So in effect, actually, the ROM cartridges could play faster than games from tape, because they're rewriting the ROM. But they didn't really take advantage of that, which is a bit of a shame, because there was a lot of potential there to do some really good stuff with ROM cartridges, and they never really took advantage of it. Most of the games that were on ROM cartridge just basically loaded like a tape game would, but loaded instantly. But they loaded into the existing within the existing ROM, which is a bit strange. Or that's my understanding of it. So I mentioned, I've got some tape games as well. I've got a ton of stuff on tape with it. So some of these games just had no inlays. They're just like there's Chip Buster there. In the cassette cases, there's a compilation from Paxman, Para's Battlezone 2000. Yeah, not the Lynx game, I don't think. Johnny Reb, Frankenstein 2000, which is actually a bit of a classic from Audiogenic. I've played that before when I wrote an article on Audiogenic for Retro Gamer magazine, and I remember playing that as part when I was doing that article, because Audiogenic gave good support to the BBC and Electron. And one of the things I was excited to find was there was loads of games, pirated games, basically on tapes, and there was some Boots C15 tapes, which everyone who had an 8-bit micro in the UK will remember these Boots tapes, because they were so popular because you could basically fit a game on each side, and they were very cheap to buy. They were great, and that was completely blank, and it's never been used. How cool is that? An original Boots C15 computer cassette. But I've also got some other classics, like there's a Philips 90. They've only put a few games on each side, which is unusual, because when I used to buy these, TDKs were my favourite, like this TDK as a D90. Everyone remembers those. It's got, as funny as it's got a Boots cassette in it, but from the inlay, you could get loads and loads and loads and loads of games on one cassette. So a bit of a waste, only put 3 on each side. There's another one I've got there. And that's the only one I've got that's got an inlay, is Stock Car by Micropower, another company that heavily supported the Electron, along with people like Superior Software, obviously, who supported the BBC with a lot of games. The major software houses in the UK, like US Gold and Ocean and stuff like that, didn't really give much support to the Acorn. When I mentioned about the revival with lots of people making games, most of the software that was coming out was budget games. Similar situation to the Atari 8-bit in the UK, really. So there was lots of budget games coming out from people like Mastertronic and Players, are two that particularly spring to mind. There was Blue Ribbon as well. There was another budget label. I think they released a lot of stuff for the BBC Micro. Blue Ribbon was the budget label of CDS. I think they'd already done a lot of BBC Micro games. So there was lots of stuff coming from people like that around that time. Yeah, and all these cassettes were in one of these really old school tape boxes. I remember my mum having loads of these, because my mum ran a dancing school, very successful dancing school, so she had loads and loads and loads of music on tape, which she used for her dance classes, and she had loads of those kind of boxes labelled up with different things on them. So as usual, I'll do a little summary at the end of the video. The light reflecting off that's really annoying me. So is the Acorn Electron worth owning? And if you are into 8-bit computers, and I'll say yes, it is. Firstly, because it looks fantastic. It's just such a gorgeous looking computer, as I already mentioned. I love how it looks. The colour is unusual. It's got such a great design. But in all practicality, I wouldn't. If you're like buying one just to play games, that's what you're interested in, and you want to buy a computer to collect for and play games on, then the Electron probably isn't what you're looking for. You're probably a lot better off going to buy a BBC Micro, because of the extended capabilities. Much of the same games, but with the extended capabilities, they play much better. I mean, the BBC Micro has so many good, albeit unofficial, conversions of early arcade games. Some of the best on any 8-bit of that era, full stop. Again, probably the only one that had better conversions of those early arcade games was the Atari 8-bit. BBC certainly had, stuff like the Spectrum and Commodore 64 beat when it came to those conversions of early arcade games. So yes, if that's what you're buying it for, then the Acorn Electron's not the machine you're looking for. But if you're more of a hardcore collector who loves 8-bit micros, then yes, it is. It's a kind of confusing one, really. It's not for everyone, the Acorn Electron, but it's certainly a great little machine that has some really unique history, and is obviously particularly interesting for being an Acorn, and the fact that ARM have been in the news recently, with various people trying to take over them. I think Nvidia are the company that are really trying to buy them out at the moment, and this forms part of the origins of today's ARM chips. So I hope you've enjoyed my look at the Acorn Electron. I've been a Retro Laird. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon. Bye bye.